And now I would like to welcome our speaker, Dave Spencer. Welcome, Dave. Dave
Hello.
has been, hello. So delighted you could join us. It looks sunny there where you are. Or maybe not. Dave has been writing secondary courses for Macmillan Education since 1994. He's the author of Gateway and Gateway Second Edition award-winning courses for secondary, and the brand new 7-level course for secondary, Great Thinkers. So we're really excited about this. Dave has so many years experience. He's recognized all over Spain, but also all over the world for the wonderful contribution he's made to teaching and course book writing for teenagers and secondary schools. So it's fantastic to have him here in person with us and for him to share all his wonderful ideas and experiences with us. And very importantly, he's also a teacher trainer, but an active teacher, secondary school teacher in a school in Madrid. So he's in the same boat as all of you out there and knows exactly what you're going through. So with no further ado, welcome Dave. His session is called Feeling Good, Social and Emotional Learning in the Secondary Classroom.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
As Louise said, thank you to all of you for finding time to be here today, because I know that we're all busy. It's 6 o'clock. I live in Getafe, where it's there's a big thunderstorm. So
you wouldn't know it.
It's a great afternoon to stay at home and watch a webinar about social and emotional learning. That's my plan. Perfect. And as Louise has said, there will be a few questions and polls in this session. So it would be great if you could get involved and answer some of my questions so that I can get some feedback. Otherwise, I get very lonely sitting here all on my own. So yes, please do get involved with those questions and those surveys, those polls. Right, the session is called Feeling Good, so I hope you are feeling good, although we're going to start a little bit with the bad and sad news, okay? So I think it's a long time since I was a teenager, but I think it's fair to say that your teenage years are often quite difficult years. I think they're years when there are particular problems that we have when we are growing up and when we are changing from being a child to being an adult. And I also think that, unfortunately, probably today, it's actually even a little bit harder, I believe, for today's teenagers. And so I straight away have a question for you in the Have Your Say. What do you think, as teachers and maybe as parents, what do you think are the biggest problems which are facing teenagers today? Would you like to just put down any ideas that you've got? What do you think? I mean, if you think that there are no problems, then you can also say that. But if you think that there are any particular problems for teenagers in the 21st century, in 2021, what do you think the biggest problems are?
Okay, so we'll just give people a couple of seconds to respond to that question. What do you think are the biggest problems facing teenagers today?
Louise,
we've got
any
an
ideas?
answer. Well, we've actually got an answer already. People are very quick off the mark. COVID, the last year, cyberbullying, lack of face-to-face communication.
Yeah.
And we could say, actually, Dave, that actually the lack of face-to-face communication has been increasing over the last number of years, hasn't it?
Yeah,
it's not just COVID.
That's right, because I think 5 years ago we would already have said that that was a problem, but of course the problem has just got bigger, hasn't it? Because as the
Yes,
first teacher said straight away, COVID, obviously,
yes.
social
Um,
media as
mhm, exactly. And they might not have resources to develop their own identity, which might force them to remain, um, to imitate others, lack of
yeah,
motivation.
yeah, social interaction,
Okay.
presumably lack of social life, right?
Social. Yes, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Oh,
great.
yes, thank you for all of those ideas. Yeah, and of course, I would agree with all of the ideas that you've put down there. Here's a slide with some of the things that I thought of, and some of these things you've already mentioned. We've mentioned, for example, isolation, and obviously that is at the moment caused by COVID. But of course, isolation, I suppose we could say that there has been an increasing feeling of teenagers being isolated. Um, Somebody mentioned cyberbullying, which I've got there as well. Um, we've got also, this idea of an uncertain future. So I think when you're a teenager, the future is always quite uncertain. You don't really know where you're going. But I suppose that's made even worse right now because, none of us know where things are going quite. Um, and the whole, so somebody mentioned social media. So there's this idea of unhappiness. Advertising has always given teenagers in particular an idea of, say, perfect bodies, a perfect life, which of course is not realistic. And I think maybe particularly when you're a teenager searching for your identity, which is something that another teacher mentioned, they said, no clear identity. I think when you're growing up and trying to find yourself, particularly at the moment, with the influence of influencers, with the influence of television, YouTube, social media, then I think that's made even worse. And then we've also got things like, unhealthy eating. We've also got physical activity. Maybe people are spending so much time in front of a screen. Now, of course, for school, but also maybe for playing games. And in the end, there's so much screen time. Now, I did say that although the talk is called Feeling Good, we've started off with the bad news. Don't worry, we're going to get to some very good news very soon. And the place that we're going to go is this place here, this country. And if there are any experts in flags there, you will probably already have identified that the country in question is Denmark. Okay. And the reason that we are going to go to Denmark is because the United Nations World Happiness Report has identified Denmark as one of the happiest places on earth. And it says then this article, and by the way, at the end of this session, I will give you some reading references so that you can go away and read some more about some of the sources that I'm going to mention today. It says that Denmark has something to teach itself and the rest of the world. What would that something be? Okay. Well, the interesting thing is that Denmark is one of the only countries in the world which has a school subject, empathy. Okay, so they actually teach empathy as a school subject. I think particularly to primary students, but I think it also continues into secondary. And they also spend a lot of time getting students to be able to identify other people's emotions. Now, I think because of this problem of so many difficulties for teenagers today, that's why suddenly social and emotional learning has become, I think, a hot topic, no longer just in primary, but also in secondary. And actually, social and emotional learning is not just about schools, by the way. Social and emotional learning might be very useful for us as adults, maybe also particularly even for us as teachers. So really, social and emotional learning is not for primary, it's not for secondary, it's not for adults, it's for all of us. And here I'm just going to explain in a nutshell, if you don't know exactly what social and emotional learning is, in a nutshell, what it means is that you should be able to understand and manage your own emotions. And if you can do this, that can help you to express how you feel, what you want, more effectively. So basically, the first idea is understanding how you feel and then being able to express that to other people. That idea then is also to help us to be able to understand other people's emotions more and also help us to manage their emotions. And the idea of all of that is it leads us to understand people's motivations, why they're behaving the way they're behaving, and that in turn can help you to interact better with them, which really, you know, if you think that's something that I think we would all like, right? For example, our teenage students, our secondary students, to be able to express themselves, to be able to get on with others, to be able to collaborate with others. Sorry, my phone is going. I'm going to switch it off. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, as I was, sorry. I'm going to ignore it, okay? I can't switch it off. So the idea would be that it's helping us to communicate and cooperate more with others. Now, what I'm going to be spending my time in this session is looking at how we can do this in the classroom, okay? One of the references that I'm going to give you is for this CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning. Okay. And usually when people talk about social and emotional learning, this diagram, this wheel is nearly always the starting point. So I'm going to use this as the starting point for my talk today, because what they do is they divide social and emotional learning into 5 different categories. We've got self-awareness, self-management. We've got then social awareness, relationship skills, and then we move into relationship skills. You'll also notice from the diagram that in the ideal world, social and emotional learning, as I said before, is not just something that happens in the classroom, and it's certainly not something that just happens in one class, in one lesson, or in one text. It's something that should be permeating what we do every day in many ways. And it should also be permeating not just your classroom, but the whole of the school. And in theory, it should also be carried on into the home and community. And I'm saying that that's in an ideal world because these things aren't always easy. But today, what I'll be looking at is, of course, what we can do in the classroom. So the first area that I want to look at is self-awareness. We said the starting point for social and emotional learning is understanding yourself better. And the CASEL organization, they identify these different skills, if you like, of self-awareness. So we've got things like identifying your personal strengths, your cultural strengths, and your linguistic strengths, which is useful for us. Demonstrating honesty and integrity, having a growth mindset, which I think you would agree is something that would be great if all of our students were conscious that they can improve, they can get better, they can develop as people. And the final thing is identifying your emotions. And I want to start with the simplest possible thing about identifying emotions and feelings with something that I think English teachers have been doing forever, the typical personality test, right? And I'm sure we've all done these in books. This is actually from Great Thinkers. It's actually from Great Thinkers B2, and it's just a very short little personality test. And you can see that basically each question has got 2 possible answers, A or B. And I thought it would be fun for us to try and do this together, okay? So we're going to do this as a poll now. So you don't think about this too hard. And I tell my students, this is not to take too seriously, but just quickly, what is your answer to number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? Is it A or B? And then what I want you to tell me in where it says the poll, I'd like you to tell me if you have more A's or more B's, okay? So just have a quick look. There are 5 questions. So in the end, do you have more answers which are A or more answers which are B? And this is the typical personality quiz. Of course, with personality quizzes, you might feel that your answer, you would like it not to be A or B, but maybe somewhere in the middle or somewhere like a letter C with a different option. But here we're simply answering A or B, okay? A or B. Okay, at the moment, A is winning after that's just one person at the moment. So A. Okay, A is definitely winning at the moment. Okay, we've got a B. Okay, B is going up. Right, it's 50-50 at the moment. That's interesting. Exactly 50-50. Let's just get a few more answers in. And while we're waiting just for the last answers to come in, I'd also like you to think, what do you think, what aspects of personality do you think this personality test is particularly trying to pinpoint? It'd be interesting if you just have a think about that, okay? What aspects of personality do you think we're looking at? Okay, I think I'm gonna take the answers of the poll right now. It keeps on changing, of course, and right now it's completely 50-50.
Okay.
That's
okay, I'm back again. Hello. So
it looks like 50 from what I can see.
Like, yes, 54% say more answers that are A and 46 B.
Right. Well, that's interesting that it is very close. I suppose it's obvious. And I asked you the question just now, what aspect of personality do you think it's looking at? And I think you've probably got the idea now that, in fact, it's a question of being more extrovert or being more introvert. And as you can see here from the key, if you answered A more often, you are more likely to be an introvert. And if you answered B more often, you may be more of an extrovert. You'll notice that it says may and likely. So we're not sort of, this is not the most serious personality test in the world, but it's simply sort of giving us an idea of this idea of, do you prefer being a little bit in a small group or do you prefer being in a large group? Now, the reason that I included something about introverts and extroverts, and by the way, I don't know if you knew, but there is in fact a word which is ambivert. Okay, I don't know if you know that, but an ambivert is somebody who is both things. And I think you could argue that sometimes we're more introverts and sometimes we're more extroverts. And actually, I think that in the classroom, I am more extrovert, and in my private life, I'm more introvert. So I think that's another thing to bear in mind. The reason why I got interested in this was because I saw a TED Talk, which I can recommend. If you've never seen this TED Talk, it's a great talk to watch. Susan Kane, The Power of Introverts. And she's also written 2 books. One, I think, is called Quiet, and the other one is called The Quiet Revolution. And she makes the point that, particularly again, talking about young people at school, is that society today tends to give more emphasis to people who are loud, to extroverts. And of course, extroverts in the world, we need extroverts and introverts. And as I said, some of us are sometimes extroverts, sometimes introverts. But she makes the point that often introverts get ignored, they get forgotten about, and they get left alone, they get left to the side. And again, I don't know if you would agree with me, but personally, as a teacher of teenagers, this is something that worries me. Because I feel that in the classroom, it's often a few louder people who do tend to dominate. From my experience, I think I've been teaching now for probably about 30, 35 years. But it often seems to be the louder people are the ones who take control. And I think it's really important that we do, as teachers, just make sure that we are paying attention to the quieter students and getting everybody to contribute. And now this is from Great Thinkers, the collaborative projects, which appear at the end of every 2 units. And in these projects, we work on different skills: digital skills, academic skills, intercultural awareness, and you can see this collaboration box. And if you look at that box, you'll see, so students are working together, and it's simply saying, I'll read it for you. When you work in a team, it's essential to listen to everyone and let everyone contribute. Sometimes 1 or 2 people can dominate in a group, but the best teams have a balance between everybody, even including the quieter members of the team. And we're also teaching language here to be able to do this. Things like, let's listen to, who hasn't spoken? You know, it's Olga's turn to speak. Now, I think that language is not always functional language that we teach, either in the classroom or in course books. But it seems to me really useful, because by teaching this language, these phrases, we are encouraging collaboration, we're encouraging respect often in these boxes, we're encouraging everybody to be involved, which is what I would like in my classroom. So in other words, these are simple ways to get students, all the students, involved. And that brings me to the whole idea then here of personality types. Now, I am a teacher, as Louise mentioned. I'm still in the classroom every day in Getafe, and I think my colleague Susanna is here today. Hello, Susanna. And I know that it's not easy when you're teaching, for example, groups of 20, 25, possibly 30 students. But there are some things I think that we need to always bear in mind with any group of students. Okay, the first one is the one that I've just mentioned, making sure that we do encourage contributions from quieter students. So making sure that those students are not drowned, if you like, by the noise of other students. Okay, the other thing I think is important is, and I've put it in a nice way, I think, diplomatically dosing the contributions of louder students. Now, whenever I watch lessons, there's always 1 or 2 students who are probably great at English, but they end up dominating the whole class. And sometimes every question that the teacher asks, it's 2 or 3 students who are always answering. And I think in the end, the other students start to switch off. So, by diplomatically dosing, what I mean is at the end of a lesson, taking those students apart and saying to them simply that you appreciate their contributions, you are aware and very happy that they are making these contributions, but explain that sometimes you might have to ask other people in the class so that everybody is participating. So you're congratulating the students, you're thanking the students, but you're making it clear that you don't want them to dominate every single question and answer section. It's also true, as I said before, with introverts and extroverts, it's simplifying things a little bit too much sometimes to say that somebody is an introvert, somebody is an extrovert. I think we often have students who might be quiet in the class, but all we need to do is to help them, encourage them a little bit, and they will participate more. We also have some students who might seem to be shy and maybe they're simply lazy. So I think the skill and the difficulty of being a good teacher is trying to change your approach according to the character of your students where possible. I also think that group work, obviously at the moment, I'm sure you're the same as me, that you're doing mask-to-mask teaching and your students can't move, right? In that case, of course, they can work individually, and at least in my situation, they can work in pairs. They're in rows, so they can just about, without moving, they can just about speak with somebody else. But in the normal world, I think it's really useful to encourage different formations so that the students who are quieter often will work better. They might work better individually and they might work better in pairs. but other students might work better in groups. So I think that that's a good reason for varying the participation as we go along. Also, I think there is a certain skill as the year progresses to finding the best partner for each student, but also changing those partners sometimes to keep things a little bit fresh. Again, I know that at the moment this is not possible because probably like me, your students have to stay in the same place all year because of coronavirus. But again, in a normal world. And if you are teaching online, of course, the possibility of breakout rooms where you can do them randomly, which is great, but you can also assign a specific partner for each student. One little trick that I always use, and I use this nearly always, is that when students do, for example, a personal speaking activity in pairs, I nearly always get them to give feedback about their partner, not about themselves. And I do this because I find that students always seem to be a little bit more willing to talk about somebody else maybe than to talk about themselves. So my usual feedback instruction is tell me one interesting thing you discovered about your partner. And I think that helps students to open up a little bit more easily. I also think correction is key to encouraging students to participate. Some students, if we only listen to their English and to their English mistakes, to their grammar mistakes, they might soon close up and refuse to answer questions because they feel embarrassed about their level of English. So being very sensitive at that correction stage. Usually when speaking is concerned, as long as my students are making an attempt, that is usually my first requirement. Then according to maybe their degree of shyness or embarrassment, then I will see how strictly, if you like, I correct them or not. And then I think the last thing, and we said at the beginning of this session, teenage students are probably having a harder time, I personally think, a harder time than ever in the past. And I think that's particularly the reason why in all of our students, we need to be spending time building confidence and building self-esteem, which really is a key part, I think, of social and emotional learning. And in Great Thinkers, we have these spreads in the middle of each unit, okay? They're often teaching some form of life skill or a shade of life skill, but looking particularly from the angle of improving students' thinking skills and also thinking about the social and emotional side of learning. And I've got here, I think you can see these 9 different points. Here there are 9 different ideas which are suggested to the students about how they can improve their self-esteem or their self-confidence. I'm not going to read those out. I think you can see them very quickly with the bolds there. But things like mistakes are good, okay? Really important to get our students to live with mistakes and not feel so bad about them. Celebrating your achievements, okay? So maybe the achievements are small. I often talk about tiny victories, but even if they've done something that they're a little bit proud of, then that's great. Let's accentuate, if you like, the positive right now. And the students, what they do is they put those in this diamond ranking formation that you can see on the right, putting the most important for them at the top and the least important at the bottom. And what we're doing is simply getting students to think about different ways that might make them feel better about themselves. And we're finishing off with a list of things that they're good at, some of their successes, some things that they've done for other people. And the whole idea here is that we're trying to create the best learners that we can who also feel good about what they're doing. And we'll come back to this in a second, facing difficult situations. We usually have to face difficult situations, so the question is dealing with them in a positive fashion. And that is really where we're heading in the next section, thinking about self-management. And I like this quotation. This is a really nice quotation. Feelings are much like waves. We can't stop them from coming, but we can choose which one to surf. In other words, in our lives, suddenly we might feel depressed, suddenly we might feel sad, suddenly we might feel angry. The question is, do we continue to go down that route, or do we try to find a different wave to surf? Now, I think this is quite funny with these emoticons. I think that the problem of being a teacher, I don't know if you would agree with me, is that our students are all on different waves at the same time. Some of them are euphorically happy for no good reason. Some of them are tragically sad for no apparent reason. And maybe even the same student is euphorically happy one minute and tragically unhappy the next. So that's a pretty difficult situation for teachers. We have to learn to deal with that. And so again, this idea of teaching self-management, which includes things like managing your emotions, showing the courage to take initiative, and stress management. And again, remember, these things are not just for students. I think they're also for teachers, okay? So if we can do all of these things, then I think we're probably doing very well, okay? If we can manage our own emotions, and if we can identify stress management strategies, that will help us as well as our students. Because basically, stress, I suppose, is part of life, isn't it? And particularly, again, as a teenage student, there are many moments when life can be particularly stressful. One of them, this again is a spread from great thinkers, study choices. So if you think of your students, they often have moments in their school life when they have to take important decisions. Are they going to study bachillerato, or are they going to study something different? Are they going to study science subjects or something different? What are they going to do after university? And those choices, of course, are quite traumatic choices. And this is a typical thinking routine which comes in great thinkers, and it's called compass points, okay? It's compass points because it's north, south, east, and west, NSEW. And if you imagine your student is about to make an important decision about what they're going to study next year, then we've got question number one: what would you need to know that could help you to prepare for this new situation? Number two, what steps could you take to deal with the situation in a positive way? Number three, what could be exciting about being in this situation? So what are the positives? And number four, what worries would you have in this situation? What are the negatives? So this actually is really useful. And I keep on saying this, but I think it's true, even for us as adults, when you're faced with a new situation in your life where there is a big change, then think about these four factors. What do you need to know to take a fully conscious decision? So N for need. What steps could you take? So how can you take on the situation in a positive way? What's exciting? So what are the good things to take away? And what are you worried about? And this is just a nice, simple structure to get students thinking about this. For example, at the end of the school year, it's also a good moment to do this, to find out what they are excited or worried about next year in their studies at school. Now, also, that reminds me of another exercise which comes here, which is precisely that, starting a new school, which can be a traumatic thing, of course. And what we've got here is advice from different students talking about how they felt when they began a new school or a new stage of school. And these are based on real students who've been talking about how they felt, what were their worries. And of course, we always say in English, a problem shared is a problem halved. But if you look at number one, it says, I was worried about, and then we've got the verb make friends, and then, but you just need, and then it says, remember, lots of other people are probably in the same position as you. Now, I imagine that you've realized, of course, that what we're doing is looking at infinitives and gerunds. And the point that I wanted to make, because I think sometimes people are skeptical, maybe about life skills, maybe about thinking skills, maybe about social and emotional learning, is that they think that they are something completely different from what they're doing in class. But what I'd like to suggest, and what we do in Great Thinkers, is that the expression in English, we kill two birds with one stone. So we're practicing our grammar, which is really important, but at the same time, the content of the exercise is really useful, really interesting, and hopefully giving a very positive message for our students. So we're basically doing two things at the same time. We're still studying English grammar and vocabulary, but we're also looking at this major point. And if you look at 4B, what do you think of the advice? Can you think of any other advice? So we've done the grammar, and then we're thinking about the content of the exercise and the positive message in it. Okay, now we're still looking at stress and anxiety, and it's time for another little question. And the question is, it seems like a very simple question, I think. Is it better for our students, A, to avoid stress at all costs, or B, to learn to live with stress? Okay, so I think it's a pretty straightforward question. What's better, to avoid stress at all costs for our students, or should they learn to live with it? Okay, so very quick, very simple question. A or B? What do you reckon? We've already got
the
one.
answers are coming in. Yes, we've got 100%
Yeah.
at learn to live with stress. I suppose because we can't avoid it. It's there. And it doesn't always depend on us, does it? I mean, the fact that
Absolutely.
it's there, but what we
Exactly.
do with it and how we manage it is something
Yeah,
we can
exactly.
perhaps
I mean, I
control.
think actually, as a parent, you always want to avoid your children being faced with stress, and of course, it's an impossible
Yeah.
mission. Okay, we've already got 13 answers, and everybody said A. So this was, I said, well, not exactly a trick question, but I think it was like an obvious question, if you like. But it's making the important point, I think, that we cannot avoid stress. So let me explain why I'm talking about stress again here. I think stress is part of a secondary student's life. We can't really avoid it. I've been talking recently, because of online teaching, I've been talking about comfort zones. And comfort zones are funny because we like comfort zones because they are comfortable. But of course, at the end, if you never leave your comfort zone, you could argue that you don't really learn anything and you never have any new experiences. So the question is, and this was a psychologist called Robert Xerxes, who came up with the theory that we all perform better when we are pushed slightly outside our comfort zone. And he called this the optimal performance zone. Of course, the problem is when somebody is pushed out of their comfort zone completely, they get into their danger zone and they are, everything is negative. And I think that to me sounds just like common sense thinking about our students. That a student who is completely in their comfort zone is maybe not really making much progress, I think. And a student who is perpetually stressed out by studying will probably be in their danger zone and will be having a hard time too. And I read this article. This is from The Independent. I should have put that. In fact, I think it's disappeared. Sorry from my slide. I think it's The Independent, but you can see that it's recent. It's November 2019. And I think this is really interesting. Failing 15% of the time is the best way to learn, okay? And it's basically saying there, you can see, when learning something new, people naturally try to challenge themselves, but the task shouldn't be too easy or too difficult. If it's too difficult, you get bored and give up. And I think this is interesting. I think at school and being a teacher, one of the secrets to being a teacher is keeping the students in that optimal performance zone. And sometimes exams do that, I think. Sometimes exams help students to push a little bit harder and to perform better. The problem is sometimes, it's very easy to go too far and we suffer stress. Now, we all agreed that we have to prepare our students to live with stress. And in that case, I think, and this is something that a word that is really popular with educationalists at the moment, resilience. I love this word, resilience. And in Spanish, actually, I must admit, I love the word tesón. My son once got a prize for tesón in judo. And I think tesón is better than being the best in the class. Tesón means that you stick with it, you try your best. And actually, I think personally, sometimes at school and at university, I've done well, not because I'm very clever, but because I've got a fair amount of resilience. So I would like to encourage my students to develop resilience in the classroom. Here, I'm going to ask you to come up with any ideas that you can think of. How can we help our students not to give up at the first defeat? How can we encourage our students to keep at a task? How can we encourage our students to have grit? Another good word in English, okay? Grit. Does anybody, would anybody like to share any ideas how they encourage students not simply to give up at the first fall?
We've got an answer.
Excellent.
Yeah. We've got one answer at the moment. By reflecting on what we can learn from each failure and success.
That's a brilliant answer, yeah. And yeah, both of them, right? And this is one of the points I'm going to make. We can learn as much from our failures as from our successes. And we talked about positive growth, a growth mindset. A growth mindset is when we fail and we think, okay, not that that's a disaster, but what can I do about it? How can I, get over the problem? How can I do it better next time? So yeah, just reflecting as this teacher. Yeah.
Yes.
Somebody might have another idea there that they'd like to share.
Just waiting. Yeah, positive reinforcement. I was actually going to say this before the person wrote it in the box. Positive reinforcement. So
absolutely.
Receiving feedback, positive, constructive feedback.
Yeah.
To help the person to believe that it's worth continuing going on and trying to improve. So that's great.
Absolutely.
Another answer, by completing a DAFL at the beginning of the term,
yes.
So that they know their strengths and difficulties, work on opportunities, threats, I think,
yes.
Or is it opportunities and make them aware of their progress, however little it may seem. That's similar to positive reinforcement or reflecting on success.
And I love that that expression, however little it may seem. And I've got a big theory here that teachers, as teachers, we have to be. It's a bit like this expression, catching students doing good things. Sometimes we do look at the negative things, but we don't pick up on even small things. A student who's usually does something badly, and once they just do it a little bit better, that's good. Any little progress is going to, is going somewhere. And I think that however little it may seem, it is really, really important. Yeah, because we don't usually see a student, they don't change overnight, do they? No. Students are studying for years and years. So I think we have to be really concentrating on little by little what they're, how they're getting better. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Absolutely.
I've seen, yes, so that they feel important, definitely. Yeah, also somebody mentioned to try to give them a wide range of tasks to find one that fits. And that's really important in English, isn't it? Because in English, students might be good at some things and not so good at others. And again, this positivity of like, okay, this student is really good at speaking. Well, let's celebrate that. and the writing might come later, or vice versa. Some students are very fluent, not very accurate. Let's build on the positives, and then also identify and work on the negatives. So you're not forgetting the negatives, but at least you're coming from a more positive place. These are great ideas. I'm going to share
Great
now.
ideas, yes. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to share some of my ideas then. And I think many of these ideas you've already mentioned. Positive response to correction. So correction is not always a negative thing. Correction means you're spotting what you're good at and what you're less good at so that you know what you're going to work on next. Really important. Realistic long-term goals. I went into my local post office, Correos, in Getafe, and for some reason behind the counter, they had a book which was Learn English, Aprender Inglés en 7 días. I mean, I wanted to buy it because it was so funny, the title. Let's keep realistic, and let's keep our students realistic with, how quickly they're going to learn. So, I think particularly adult students are bad at this. They expect to learn really quickly and get frustrated when they realize that this is a long journey. And our students really need to know that it is a long journey, but we can celebrate the steps on the way. Receptive skills. We all know that many students, they begin a listening, and after 30 seconds and the first question, they give up. They give up because they think they need to understand everything. A resilient learner won't give up because they know that you don't have to understand everything. You don't have to understand every word in a reading text. We know this, but sometimes we forget to emphasize this to our students. So reminding them of why it's not necessary can help them to become more resilient. Somebody has already mentioned this: identifying, recognizing, and working on strengths and weaknesses. Pointing out the aims of activities. And I read a fascinating book recently which said that it's really important to explain to students why not everything we do in the classroom is fun. Now, I do love doing games and game-like activities in the classroom. But then, after the game, we need to do page 53, exercise 6. But let's explain why. And I make this parallel situation. When you learn to play the guitar, I don't play the guitar, okay? But when you learn to guitar, I believe you play the same note and the same chord again and again and again to get it right. Now, that's probably not much fun, but you have to do it. If you're learning to be, say, a classical musician, if you're learning to play tennis, I imagine a top tennis player has to play the same shot again and again and again and again to make sure they get it right. That's not always fun. So I think it's good to point out to students, and I think in the 21st century, some students forget this, that they think we should all be Ronald McDonald, but it's not all fun, right? I mean, if it's fun, that's great, but sometimes we just need to do an activity because it's useful. But let's explain why. What is the purpose of the activity? What's the purpose of the grammar activity, for example? And another thing we can do, I think, which is really useful, is pointing out role models of tenacity, not just in the classroom. This is from Great Learners. In fact, it's from the B2+, which is not yet out, but it's all about determination and resilience. And it's looking at two role models, two people who suffered bad accidents doing sport and climbing, and then they went on to push themselves to greater heights. This is a fascinating lady. She's got a great website. She literally became paralyzed from the chest down, and she's now going across the Arctic, the Antarctic. She's done cycling races, and she explains it's not all great, it's not all blue sky, but she sort of suggests here how she overcame this situation. And I think it's great for our students to realize, that, there are these people who are in much worse situations than us, and they're somehow continuing in a positive light. This then develops to making connections between that video, which is a documentary video, and this lady, and then working out, if you look at 6A just very quickly, nowadays teachers and educators often talk about the importance of determination and resilience for students. So we're making connections between those role models, and we are now thinking about what is determination in the classroom. What do you, how important is determination and resilience when you are studying, and bringing these subjects out into the open. I think that's one of the secrets of social and emotional learning, is it's trying to talk about some of these things, because as I said before, sharing is halving the problem, and talking about these things can just help. I've got some quotations, and in fact, some of these quotations I've seen on classroom walls. So you might even want to take some of these quotations and put them on a classroom wall yourself, because I think they're really nice ideas. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Remember, you'll get the PDF of this talk afterwards, so you can look at those quotations in more detail laterwards. But the penultimate one, I'm a great believer in luck, and I find the harder I work, the more I have of it. Great quotation, and it's very true in the classroom, isn't it? The lucky students are usually the ones, what about, sorry. I've just whacked right the way through my presentation. Okay, yeah, so it's basically then the idea of sharing those ideas so that students can feel more positive about them. Right, now, I'm going to go more quickly because I'm conscious that I'm taking too long on a lot of these points. Remember, you will get the whole presentation so you can look at these, and I think most of them are self-explanatory. Social awareness, then, is basically showing concern for the feelings of others. And one area is demonstrating empathy and compassion. And this quotation from To Kill a Mockingbird is a lovely quotation. Looking at things from a different point of view. And I think that's even more, in fact, I'm going to miss that one out, but I'm going to share this, okay? You can see the example from Great Thinkers afterwards. But I think this is a lovely quotation, which is all about social awareness. It's not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. And what we do again in Great Thinkers is we have these culture exchanges where we are thinking about the differences between, for example, school life in Australia, school life in the UK, and then school life here, for example, in Spain, and getting students to simply think about how things are different and also why things are different. And this is also linked with the project that we saw before, and I pointed out that one of those micro skills is intercultural awareness. So getting students to think about why things are similar and why things are different. And like my quotation before, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, differences are not the problem. It's not respecting those differences. So the objective here, a little bit like the question of mediation, which is popular at the moment, getting students to think about how things are similar and different and why that might be, instead of just saying they're weird, which I think is a lot of what a lot of people do. They simply consider that the difference is strange. Now, the last 2 points are the ones that I wanted to spend slightly less time talking about, because I personally believe that self-awareness, self-management are the real keys. But within relationship skills, the last point that you can see on the slide is the question of communicating effectively. Obviously, relationships are built on communication. And the great thing is that we, as teachers of English, are also interested in effective communication. And you'll see here that we've got this brief guide to effective communication, where we're getting students to do 4 things. We're reminding them of 4 things, which actually most adults need to remember too, I think. The first one is to think before you speak, okay? And I think we would all agree that that is sometimes difficult to do, but also very useful to do. So number 1, think before you speak. Remember, this is this is Great Thinkers B2+. Think before you speak. Number 2 is be assertive. So that means, it doesn't mean being bossy, it means making your message clear and making sure you're saying what you want to say. But as it suggests there, at the moment when you think you're getting angry, then the best thing to do is to take a deep breath and calm yourself. And again, this is great advice for our students. It's also pretty good advice for ourselves, right, too. As is tip number 3, which is remembering to listen. So communication is not all about speaking, is it? And even in the First for Schools exam, a good speaking exam, it's not just a question of speaking, it's a question of listening to your partner and interacting sensibly with what your partner says. And finally, something again that I think our students can sometimes learn is body language. So their body language, without them realizing, maybe their body language is sending bad messages. Maybe they don't think they're being confrontational, but maybe their body language is. Maybe they don't think that they look, for example, particularly lacking in confidence, but maybe their body language is giving them away. So that's worth thinking about too. Now, the last area that I want to look at is making responsible decisions. So this is like, if you like, the peak of social emotional learning. It involves also critical thinking, which, as you know, is something that I'm particularly interested in Gateway, and particularly now in Great Thinkers. And one of the other things is this idea, the last point, making a reasoned judgment after analyzing information, data, and facts. Now, I've mentioned that Great Thinkers includes lots of videos, and many of these videos are from national television in the UK. They're all authentic, documentary style. I think just about a couple more minutes, and then we've got a question and answer session. So if you want to even start thinking about any questions you might like to ask me in a minute. But the last thing that I wanted to talk about before we go to questions is what do teenage students want from us? So far we're talking about, in a way, what we want from our students. What do you think they want from us? And this is an article. I'll give you a link to the article in one of the last slides. It was a great article that asked, it did a survey of students in the UK, the 25 traits that make a perfect secondary teacher. And this was 2017, so it's more or less recent, okay, pretty recent. Now, I wonder, have you got any ideas? What do you think teenagers look for in a secondary teacher? What do you think are the most important things that that students look for in a teacher? Any idea?
Oh, okay, so we're launching that question now. It should appear on your screen. What do you think are the most important traits that teenagers look for in a secondary teacher? And we're getting some answers. Fairness.
Right.
Being one.
Yeah. That is definitely one that I think we feel is pretty important. Confidence, I've seen as well. So they look for somebody who looks confident. Yeah, actually, my advice to new teachers is always look confident, even if you don't feel confident, because I think which is easier said than done.
Yes.
But I think it is something that students notice lack of confidence from a teacher. They have an innate ability to spot that.
Empathy and support. Empathy and support. Somebody,
right.
Now, this one, somebody to share their problems with, I suppose. Yes.
Right.
Balance,
and I've noticed that Amelia from Macmillan has written fun, and fun is actually going to be very high up there. Okay.
Yes.
Very high up there. Somebody to share their problems, being clear. That's certainly something that I think is really important. Yeah.
And also, there was another one which I think I missed now. Let me see. Fairness has come up again. Somebody, being clear. Somebody, that's the one. Somebody they can rely on.
Right.
And
okay.
I suppose trust, which is yes.
Right. Well, this is really interesting. Thanks again for everybody being so quick. Off the mark. I'm going to show you the top 10, okay, from this article. Now, before I show it to you, I'm not saying that I agree with it, okay? But here we've got it. And look at that. Number one is funny. Number two is fair. And somebody mentioned fairness immediately. Understanding. And somebody did mention that too, didn't they? Sort of mentioning like sharing problems, and good listener. Good listener is number 5. Helpful, supportive, and I think some of you mentioned that too. Inspiring, which is a great quality in a teacher, isn't it? If a teacher is inspiring. Knowledgeable. Somebody I think mentioned that, right? Somebody mentioned something similar to knowledgeable.
Yes.
Yes. I don't remember what exactly the expression was, but something similar, yeah. And then we've got patient, passionate, and again, fun. Isn't it interesting? We've got number 1 is funny, and number 2 is fun. Now, remember, this is what teenage students in the UK are saying. Now, we could say, are they right or are they wrong? The one thing that I just want to point out to finish is that most of those 10 qualities are more to do with personal skills than to do with teaching skills that maybe we learn at university or on a postgraduate course. And I think this just, for me, compounds the importance of the social and emotional side in the classroom. That, we think of our subject as the most important thing. A history teacher thinks that history is the most important thing, and an English teacher thinks that English is the most important thing. But maybe our students do look up to us as sort of figures that are going to be fun, interesting, good listeners, helping them. So I think they're more personal things than we would possibly think. Personal rather than professional. Again, I'm not sure if they're right in thinking this or not, but I think it's significant that teenage students are looking for, it almost feels like a nice person, doesn't it? They're looking for us to be nice people, nice, inspiring people. So I think that's really interesting. And here is a link to some of those different sources that I've mentioned today, talking about Denmark and empathy, those traits making the perfect teacher, and the CASTLE, which was the Collaborative for Social and Emotional Learning. And that 25 traits making a perfect teacher is a really fascinating article, because in that they discuss whether the students are right or whether it's surprising or whether it's wrong what they want. But very interesting reading. Okay, I've come to the end a little bit later than expected, but I wonder if somebody does have a burning question that they would like to ask me before Santi comes to speak to you at past. Any questions that you've got?
No, don't worry about going over a bit, Dave. It's been fascinating, and I do think that these are questions that need, certain attention, and it's better not to, rush through it, but actually give it the time, which you've done, and it's been very good. And I think what's come through for me is how important it is as a teacher to be aware and put all of this into practice, because the teacher is the role model within the school setting, is the reference point for the students. And so, you said at the beginning that social and emotional learning is relevant for young children, older children, teenagers, adults, the whole lot. But particularly in a school setting, there's no point coming along with a course book and saying, this is, these are what we should be doing, if we're not actually putting it into practice ourselves.
I think that's right. And I think it would even be absurd, really, in a way, for us to sort of, doing a lesson on social and emotional learning if you're not actually listening to your students, if you're not being patient, if you're not being, like you said, a good role model, then it doesn't make much sense.
Yes. But there are, as we know, and it happens with all age groups, there are outside pressures. You're under pressure with time, restraints to cover, the curriculum to cover, material to get through this, to get through. We are human, so maybe there's also an element of not be too hard on yourself, or and
absolutely
helping students to understand that as well, because there will be stress, but it's how you manage it, as you said.
That's right.
Very clearly.
Recently, I was doing a classroom management session. Somebody asked about, should teachers ever say sorry, if they do something wrong? Well, that's a good example. Saying you're sorry because you did maybe get angry, or you said something. Saying sorry is a great thing. You're being a great role model for your students by saying sorry. There's nothing better, really. One thing I was is that obviously a way of incorporating this into the classroom is through the materials we use. And that's why, in Great Thinkers, I mean, in Gateway second edition too, really, if you look, it's sort of the messages throughout, like I said before, not one page or anything. It's like a message that keeps on coming up. So it's integrated into your teaching in a way, because, giving positive role models, these role models about tenacity, resilience, it's sort of incorporated. It's not like there are 10 units and one of them is about this. No, it's
Yes.
sort of a part of every unit, really.
Absolutely, and it needs to be, because it's something that needs to be developed over time. As you say, your character. You talked about the different characters in the class, and responding to them, and adapting to them. But the one's character, how one reacts, changes over time. So it's so important for it to be an integral part, of
Yes,
the
exactly. I think it's
classroom
that the
setting.
integral part, and even the collaboration that I mentioned in the projects. I mean, I actually think that, because I do teach in a Spanish school, I think it's got to do a lot with what teachers often mention in tutorías. They're sort of the positive
Yes,
messages about respecting one another and things like that. And by the way, I do want to make it clear, I know that these things are always easier said than done. So I'm not
yes,
pretending this is like, incredibly easy, that we can suddenly change our students. But I do believe that, we need to be transmitting these positive messages to sort of help our students just
absolutely.
learning respect. I think it's something that maybe when I was a boy, it was taken for granted, but I don't think today we can
Yes.
maybe take these things for granted anymore.
No, exactly. Well, we have some comments in the chat box. Everything, for example, everything was perfectly explained. It was crystal
Thank you very
clear.
much.
Yeah. I
I,
mean, it
I don't
was. It
usually make
was.
sense at 6 o'clock.
No, you made absolutely perfect sense, and it was very nicely, I think, structured, and the ideas. I think you really got across that idea that it's very much integrated into the classroom, into the course, as you said, which makes it doable. Because at the end of the day, you're a secondary school teacher as well. You know what it's like to be in the classroom, and um, that this needs to be part and parcel of the daily routine, or the classroom practice. So I think
Yeah.
you've made that perfectly clear.
And actually,
Um,
I mentioned resilience, but I think actually teachers as well. Resilience is one of our keys, isn't it? Because this is not an
yes.
easy job. So we also, and I think we are resilient, aren't we, teachers? I mean, the day in and day out.
Well, absolutely. And year in, year out, and this year more than ever, it's been
Absolutely.
proven that teachers have been, I don't know, is resilient and strong enough, or accurate enough to describe what the teaching community has achieved this year. So yeah,
Yeah.
maybe we need to invent new language for that. So thank you, everyone. Oh, sorry, there is another comment. It is so good to keep updated with thought-provoking ideas. Even if we are not fully applying them, we can think about them and then start practicing. That's lovely.
Well, that is a lovely comment. Yeah, that's what it's all about, really. Yeah, just
Yes,
and just trying things out, sort of, and being aware of these things is often the first
exactly.
step.
Exactly. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dave. It's been a real
Well,
pleasure. You've given us so
thank you.
much, and yes, it's been great. And you've talked. I mean, these are all ideas, but you've put them in a very practical context, yeah, and shown us that this is very much feasible, and that you can kill two birds with one stone. No, with
I love
the language and the
it. It always sounds
and
a little bit
the
violent. A nice expression. It means,
I
yeah,
know, I
obviously,
don't, yes, sorry. We have this
yeah.
image in our heads, but
And again,
yes,
you mentioned before that time is usually the biggest problem for teachers. So if we can do two things at the same time, I think it helps a lot.
exactly, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. It's been wonderful, and
Thanks
hope to see
everybody.
you again soon, eh? Dave, it's always a pleasure to have you here. Okay, so
Thanks very much.
now,
Yeah.
thank you. So people, don't go away. I'm going to introduce Santi Diaz. Santi is our representative sales manager in Madrid, and he's going to talk to us about great thinkers. Okay, this will be in Spanish. He's going to explain more detail, the course, components, etc. Okay, Santi, todo tuyo.
Bueno, pues buenas tardes. Pues mi labor hoy es presentaros de una forma más habitual lo que hacemos cuando vamos a los centros, la nueva creación de Dave. Lo habéis visto casi todo. El corazón del libro os lo ha explicado Dave, pero bueno, yo os quería dar una visión un poco más de conjunto para que conozcáis no solamente el libro, sino también todos los componentes y todos los recursos que podéis tener, ¿vale? Dave, bueno, ¿qué os puedo decir de Dave? Dave, aparte de ser un grandísimo autor con muchísimo éxito, bueno, pues también es profesor, como os ha dicho, en un colegio con un proyecto bilingüe, con lo cual está al día de todas las necesidades de los alumnos y, por supuesto, de todas las innovaciones educativas, ¿vale? Entonces, todo esto pues viene reflejado en lo que es Great Thinkers. ¿Qué es lo que os vais a encontrar con Great Thinkers? Bueno, pues una práctica exigente de vocabulario y gramática con un enfoque comunicativo, un enfoque muy práctico que lo habéis visto ya en todo lo que es Social Emotional Learning y el Critical Thinking, un trabajo por proyectos colaborativo, todo lo que es la conciencia cultural, no solamente de la cultura británica, sino comparada con Australia, con Estados Unidos, incluso comparativo con España. Material para atender a la diversidad y mucho hincapié en lo que es la inclusión. Prácticas de exámenes integrada dentro de la unidad y en los recursos tanto del alumno como del profesor. Unas secciones opcionales que van más allá, con la parte de literatura y esteem, y por supuesto un soporte digital de última generación, tanto para el alumno como para el profesor. Además del diseño atractivo que a simple vista salta en el libro, Great Thinkers está repleto de práctica, como ya os digo, con un enfoque muy comunicativo, porque usa el lenguaje como medio, no como objetivo. Es una metodología ya probada con las 2 ediciones anteriores de Great Thinkers y sabemos que funciona, ¿vale? A la hora, por ejemplo, de presentar la gramática se presenta en contexto con la ayuda de los vídeos y hay 4 diferentes vídeos, un poco por evitar esa monotonía de los alumnos y para que las clases pues sean diferentes y cambiemos de situaciones para ir trabajando esas inteligencias de los chicos. Por un lado, los 4 tipos son los Grammar with Dave, que algunos ya conocéis de versiones anteriores, que sale Dave haciendo esa presentación de la gramática con un toque de humor que gusta tanto a los chavales. Los Cut-Out Animation, que son presentaciones con flash de imágenes muy visuales para los chicos. Los Handwriting Animation, que es una representación como lo que hacéis en el día a día en la clase, cuando hacéis una explicación en la pizarra. Bueno, pues también explicaciones de esa gramática así. Y los Grammar Gurus, que son adolescentes de la misma edad del nivel que tiene el libro, haciendo una presentación de la gramática en un contexto real, en una situación real de la vida cotidiana, para ir aplicando ese uso de la gramática. Vale. Para mí, como hemos oído antes a Dave explicando todo esto, este es el corazón de Great Thinker y realmente la parte más diferenciadora e innovadora que tiene Great Thinkers. Una vez que hemos trabajado todo lo que es el scaffolding de los contenidos, la gramática, el vocabulario, de forma integrada con las destrezas, Great Thinker lo que se centra es en el aprendizaje y en la producción socioemocional y en el pensamiento crítico. Son dos habilidades clave en el desarrollo de los alumnos como personas y como preparación para el mundo real. Entonces, a través de un vídeo como el que nos ha enseñado antes Dave, que son vídeos originales, ya sea de la BBC o de DLA, lo que vamos a ir trabajando son temas que son candentes, temas que van a atraer a los chavales y que forman parte de los temas que quiere la Agenda 2030 de Naciones Unidas y que se deben ir aplicando en todas las leyes educativas que se hagan en toda la Unión Europea. Vamos a trabajar lo que es la conciencia social, el crecimiento personal, la sostenibilidad, la igualdad, el medio ambiente, la gestión de emociones, todo lo que es la conciencia cultural. Entonces, son temas muy atrayentes para los chavales y que van a hacer unas clases muy dinámicas en el día a día. Todo esto se hace a través de las Visible Thinking Routines, que es lo que nos ha comentado antes Dave, que no es otra cosa que ayudar a los alumnos para, en función de la edad, organizar sus ideas con la ayuda de estos cuadros de Great Thinkers, como hemos visto, y después de leer otras opiniones, otras opiniones que puedan tener otros compañeros o que se las plantean en el libro, bueno, pues al final crear la suya propia teniendo en cuenta, respetando todo lo que ha escuchado. Y todo esto se incluye, por supuesto, ya en los informes PISA, por ejemplo. A continuación, lo que hacemos es aplicar esta rutina en una actividad para que remarque cuáles son esas cualidades de los alumnos en el cuadro de Great Thinkers y en el Learner Profile que tenemos al final, que veis aquí abajo, al final del libro, y que es una especie de repositorio de todo lo que se ha trabajado en ese nivel, de lo que se ha trabajado ese año. ¿Vale? Great Thinkers también lo que tiene es, intenta también mejorar y cada vez más mejorar esa inteligencia cultural, esa conciencia cultural, y lo hace a través de proyectos, de 5 proyectos colaborativos, cada 12 unidades, que están relacionados con un tema cultural. Los proyectos están súper pautados, como hemos visto antes y nos ha enseñado Dave, están muy completos y luego, bueno, pues todo esto está más desarrollado, si queremos, en el workbook con un auténtico cuaderno de proyecto, ¿vale? Para poder hacerlo mucho más de forma realmente aplicando todo lo que son las tareas colaborativas. En cuanto a la diversidad y la inclusión, como os decía, por ser un libro para un nivel alto, con un nivel de exigencia, como os he dicho, alto, como siempre, no queremos dejar a ningún chico atrás. Entonces, para eso, lo que dotamos es al libro, dentro del libro, pues material para atender a esa diversidad y atender a todas las necesidades de los chicos, tanto en formato físico, en papel, dentro del libro, como en formato digital. Entonces vamos a tener un apoyo personalizado con estas secciones que vamos a ir viendo dentro del libro. A la hora de participación en esos proyectos colaborativos en el que unos alumnos van a ayudar a otros compañeros y, por supuesto, con recursos para el profesorado con material extra para atender esas necesidades, como os digo. Por ejemplo, en el tema al final de la unidad tenemos estos check-it, que tenemos por los grammar reference y los grammar test, tanto de vocabulario y de gramática, que nos permiten, bueno, pues al final de la unidad hacer ese repaso para fijar todos esos contenidos de gramática y vocabulario Otro aspecto también, bueno, pues al final todos los Reach Higher que tenemos para gramática, para vocabulario, para reading, tanto para niveles de refuerzo como para niveles de ampliación. También tenemos lo que son los Grammar Savvy, que son, bueno, pues para ayudar a esa comprensión de la gramática, igual, actividades de refuerzo y actividades de mayor reto. Los Workbook, como ya es norma, bueno, pues a 3 niveles de exigencia para ir dando al alumno en función del potencial que tenga o de la respuesta que nos pueda dar y hacer esa continuidad, ese progreso del alumno, que muchos de ellos, pues a lo mejor empiezan con un nivel de exigencia más bajo y al final del curso pues va subiendo. Todo lo que son fichas de apoyo con worksheet para refuerzo, ampliación de gramática, para ese enfoque comunicativo que os digo, o para esa práctica extra de gramática. Y por supuesto los exámenes a 2 niveles de exigencia, tanto los de diagnóstico, de unidad, de trimestre, de final de curso, y con la práctica de exámenes externos, pues desde el nivel A1 hasta el nivel C1 de los 7 niveles que tiene. En el Teacher Book, como veis, bueno, el Teacher Book está completamente a color, con un montón de notas, tanto de atención a la diversidad, como veis a la derecha, para los fast finisher, actividades extra, o para atender esos mixability, como bueno, pues para ampliar o para reforzar una idea con notas de ayuda para el profesorado, para que en el día a día, en lo que es en el aula, tengáis siempre a mano no un simple solucionario, sino una ayuda para poder ir enfocando las clases de forma diferente en función de las necesidades. Sobre las prácticas de exámenes externa que tenemos integrada en el libro, bueno, pues tanto dentro de la unidad con estas llamadas que hay de los exam tips, como cada 2 unidades vamos a tener los exam success, y al final del libro para reforzar todos esos contenidos y para poder ampliarlo en aquellos centros que queráis tener como ese objetivo secundario de presentaros a vuestros alumnos a los exámenes externos. Y al final del workbook, ellos también de forma para autoestudio, para trabajar, reforzar más en casa, tenemos estas secciones de exam trainer para que al final todos los alumnos puedan ir muy bien preparados a esos exámenes externos. Algo fuera de lo normal y algo que diferencia a Great Thinkers, bueno, pues al final del Student Book también tenemos una sección de 8 páginas para aquellos de vosotros que os gusta trabajar la literatura o las lecturas con una mayor profundidad, pues tenéis 8 páginas de un título de literatura que va incluido con el token del alumno, es decir, el alumno, ahora lo veremos, aparte de la licencia digital, 100% con trazabilidad de cada uno de los componentes al comprar el libro en formato en papel. Bueno, pues también tiene la lectura completa digital para cada uno de los niveles. Entonces, este es el título que se trabaja en profundidad, donde vamos a trabajar pues el autor, el contexto histórico, el de la obra, los personajes, los análisis de texto, o sea, de una forma muy completa para aquellos de vosotros que os gusta dar ese toque de literatura también en vuestras clases. También, como no, una parte muy importante de la LOMLOE, aunque ya en muchos textos ya lo íbamos introduciendo y normativa incluso de la Unión Europea, es trabajar todo lo que es la parte de esa transversalidad a la parte de esteem. Es decir, trabajar contenidos relacionados con las asignaturas de Science, de Technology, de Engineering, de Arts, de Mathematics, ¿vale? Entonces, ¿cómo vamos a hacer esto? Pues a través de 3 proyectos. Son 3 proyectos opcionales que hay para cada uno de los niveles. Y en estos proyectos también ponemos mucho el foco, por ejemplo, en el tema de cuando hablábamos de la equidad, bueno, pues todo lo que son mujeres en la ciencia, mujeres en la literatura, y bueno, pues también hacemos ese apoyo que va a ir marcado también en la LOMLOE, como es el de acercar o fomentar esas vocaciones STEAM para las alumnas que tenéis en clase. Y bueno, pues en la última página de estas 8 que os digo de los proyectos, también tenemos el recordatorio, el resumen de todo ese vocabulario que hemos visto transversal de otras asignaturas y la rúbrica para poder hacer la evaluación si así lo creéis conveniente. En cuanto a los componentes, bueno, pues es un libro completamente nuevo y está, bueno, pues después de la experiencia que hemos tenido con el coronavirus, desgraciadamente, y con la pandemia, cómo ha crecido esa necesidad de que la oferta digital vaya pareja al libro físico. Bueno, pues todos los alumnos, como ya os he comentado antes, con el libro en papel tienen el token del libro digital. Es un libro digital de verdad, con 100% trazabilidad, todos los ejercicios están activos, con los vídeos, con los audios y además de ello, también tenemos un token con un app para el alumno en el que vosotros podéis mandar tarea, homework, diferenciada, individualizada. Es decir, no solamente una tarea a nivel general de toda la clase, sino que atendiendo a esa universidad podemos incluso a cada uno de los alumnos dar una tarea diferenciada para que puedan trabajar en función de su rendimiento y, como veis, pues también la lectura para trabajarlo. Por supuesto, la herramienta para presentar en las pizarras digitales, completamente actualizada, completamente nueva y con una gran funcionalidad con trazabilidad, con generador de pruebas de evaluación, bastante completa, y que invito a que vayan vuestros comerciales y os enseñen esta nueva plataforma. En cuanto a recursos para vosotros, pues igual, los que estáis acostumbrados a trabajar con nuestros libros, sabéis que todo lo que es en el Teacher Resource Center vais a tener bastante material de fichas para poder atender esa diversidad, esos refuerzos, esos tests y bueno, pues todo material para cubrir, como os digo, todas esas necesidades. Todo el material digital está compatible y está integrado con plataformas que utilizáis como Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams o con Zoom. Directamente, simplemente apretar el botón de conexión, meter vuestro usuario y vuestro password de la plataforma y todos los contenidos se pueden compartir. Y por supuesto los Kahoot ya realizados para cada una de las unidades para que lo tengáis todo a mano y muy fácil de utilizar. ¿Vale? Y bueno, pues esta última diapositiva lo he intentado hacer lo más rápidamente posible. Bueno, pues resume un poco lo que es la filosofía, el contenido de Great Thinkers, con ese trabajo que es lo que aporta, esa inteligencia emocional, ese enfoque cultural, esa conciencia cultural, todo lo que es enseñar a pensar, crear opinión por parte de los alumnos con el critical thinking y bueno, pues esa pasión por el aprendizaje y por la enseñanza que transmite Dave, por supuesto, lo vamos a tener en los libros y en el día a día de la clase cuando trabajéis con él y bueno, pues por supuesto todo lo que es la alfabetización digital que cada día es más demandada. ¿Vale? Y por mi parte, nada más. No sé si tenéis alguna pregunta.
A ver, vamos a mirar. Gracias, Santi. Muchas gracias por esta presentación. Vamos a ver si hay alguna pregunta. De momento no ha sido, bueno, vamos a dejar pasar unos segundos, pero ha sido muy completa la presentación. Y también, bueno, la ponencia. So Dave's talk. I'm going to switch to English now. Dave's talk was very clear, I think, as well on how great thinkers really is an incredibly complete course to not just teach students or help students develop their linguistic capacity, their linguistic skills, but also all those other key skills that he talked about.
Macmillan Education presenta Únicos, el podcast sobre la inclusión en el aula.
Okay, so I've just got some comments. Santi dice, gracias, todo muy claro, Santi. Thanks a lot, todo claro. Thank you very much. Me parece que, Santi, el resumen es todo muy claro, que no tenemos preguntas. But I will say that we're going to launch a Survey Monkey now, and it's very important that we get feedback from you on this event, on Dave's talk, on also whether or not you would like to learn more about this course, Great Thinkers, that Santi has so clearly explained to us now. Please answer that question. We really do want to talk to you. We want to hear from you. And there was also a question in there about future teacher training events, topics that you would like to suggest. Please do. Your opinion is really important to us. And all that remains for me to say is to thank you all out there. Thank you for being with us this evening. It's been a very trying year for you all. I wish you the very best for the end of this year's course and wish you a very happy and relaxing holiday when it finally comes round in the summer. Thank you to Dave for giving that wonderful talk, and to Santi for the great presentation. It's been a real pleasure, and I just want to say once again I want to applaud everybody, and in particular the teachers out there, for the wonderful work that you've been doing all this year and are continuing to do.